Alright, so after a longer than expected break, largely thanks to Elden Ring, I am back with more PSP videos, largely because even though I loved Elden Ring and, I want to just keep playing it forever, at a certain point I have to start making videos again. And the thing that I was really hooked on prior to the whole Elden Ring launch was the PSP, and now that I've sort of had my fill of Elden Ring, well, so to speak, I'm still going to play it a whole lot more, I'm really still excited for the PSP and still looking into games that I can pick up for it. But one of the things that I started thinking about was the fact that I have a lot of love for the PSP because I was there when the system launched, and then periodically, in those years since it first came out, it had a whole lot of great games for it. But what I realized was that a lot of people may not have any familiarity with the PSP at all, and it might be a curiosity for them, and they may have no idea where to start when it comes to seeking out great games for the platform. Because maybe you just ignored it whenever it launched, or there's at least some possibility you were not even alive when it launched, which makes me feel tragically old. But that's where we are, and that's what today's video is all about, is if you are somebody who's looking to explore the PSP and you've never done so before, or maybe you actually did explore the PSP and there are certain games that you overlooked, these are games that I think are absolute no-brainer pickups that you can absolutely have a great time with. But I had some criteria in making this video. Mainly three things. One, each game could only represent one genre, right? Because I didn't want to overlap and pick like 2 racing games or 3 RPGs or something like that. Two, the game could not break the bank, so these had to be about $25 or less, maybe a little bit more in some cases, but generally around that $25 range. And then three, it had to be able to offer an above average experience, meaning that I didn't really want to have just okay games. I really wanted to showcase what I felt were great games for the system. And I think you will find that a lot of these you could easily find on like a top 10 list of the system of all time, but nonetheless these are still games that I would personally choose and ones that I have some familiarity with if I haven't outright beaten them multiple times. So with that in mind, I'm going to start with a genre that is usually one of my weakest because, again, not much of a sports guy, but that would be the racing genre, and I'm going to go with an obvious pick here, Ridge Racer. Now, I've never really been into hardcore realistic racers in the, in the vein of like Gran Turismo or anything like that. For me, it's always been more of an arcade-like experience that I liked the most. But Ridge Racer, I think, strikes kind of a good balance between arcadey racer and more legitimate racer. Not in the same way that you get from, say, like Forza Horizon or something like that, but pound for pound, it is an excellent racing experience. I think the presentation and graphics are amazing for the time. Again, we're talking about technology that at this point is, almost 20 years old, but it still looks really great on the PSP screen. The action is fast, it's frenetic, and there's a huge emphasis on drifting and naturally just sort of making sure that you can build up that boost meter and kind of get a lead where you can. And while I'm not an authority on racers whatsoever, this is a game that I have zero hesitation about just popping in on a regular just to go ahead and try to, finish a few more races and just really have a great time with it. Would I pick it over one of the Burnouts? Maybe not necessarily, but I also know that Burnout and that sort of pseudo car combat nature that it has isn't necessarily everyone's cup of tea. And if you're somebody who just wants a kind of mostly traditional racing experience, but certainly with not the, hardcore realistic physics that you would get from like a true simulation, then I think Ridge Racer is definitely worth checking out, and it's a pretty iconic franchise in its own right. Next up, if you're looking to get your action fix on the PSP, you really can't go wrong with God of War Chains of Olympus. Now, God of War Chains of Olympus is not a super long game, but what really makes it impressive is that it really did aspire to the same heights of over-the-top action that you would have gotten from one of its legitimate early console entries. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about modern-day 2018 God of War or anything like that, but if you were a fan of the original series and you sort of liked the way that those played, you'll find that almost nothing was lost in translation and bringing it to the smaller screen on the PSP. And in turn, it basically has everything that you would expect from a God of War game. Over-the-top combat, an intriguing story, interesting characters, and gigantic, just screen-filling boss battles that are a joy to unfold, even if it does rely a little bit on quick-time events, which were, pretty common back then in gaming. But nonetheless, if you're a Kratos fan and you've historically enjoyed all of the entries in the God of War series, you're definitely going to have a good time with this one. Now, I think this, along with Ghost of Sparta, actually was ported to the PS3, so you might be able to play it there as well if you're just like, hey, I don't really care about the PSP, I just want to play more God of War games. I think there are still ways that you can play that on console if you prefer, but if you are looking for a portable size action adventure, you really can't go wrong with God of War, and much like all of the other entries on this list, it's not an overly expensive game. I think normally you can find it around the $20–25 range. Next up, even though I said that I'm not very, well-versed when it comes to anything sports, I am slightly more well-versed in what you would call extreme sports, and that is why I would absolutely recommend Tony Hawk's Underground 2 Remix to anybody. Tony Hawk series has been an interesting one because most people will concede that those earliest entries were probably some of the best, and recently we did get, the remake of Tony Hawk 1 and 2, which is absolutely excellent, but there was a point where Tony Hawk games started to fall off a little bit. And I'm happy to say that Tony Hawk's Underground 2 Remix was really before that started to happen, and to me it was just like peak performance of everything that you'd come to love about the Tony Hawk series leading up to it, albeit again in a portable package, and it sacrificed very little. Now visually, of course, it's not going to be on par with what you would have gotten out of consoles at the time, but it's pretty close. And I will say that the visuals in this game feel pretty secondary to me anyways, because it's really more about the precise timing of pulling off tricks, and I like the fact that even though it does have a story mode, which might be hit or miss for you depending on if you're a Bam Margera fan or not, I guess, it does still have classic modes included, so you can just go ahead and do 2-minute runs and try to do things like collect all of the tapes, or collect skate, or just get big scores. And it's honestly, that to me is one of the best ways that you could play Tony Hawk is in portable form, just because that sort of 2-minute timer does lend itself really well to quick pick up and play sessions. So if you're somebody who's historically been a fan of the Tony Hawk series, it's definitely just, again, a no-brainer that you can pick up, and not a very expensive one. I think I got it for about 20 bucks in the modern age. I don't know if that will start to go up at some point, but nonetheless, if you're somebody who likes the Tony Hawk experience, you can't go wrong with Thug 2. You just can't. It's great. Next up is a game that I've seen waver in price, so I was kind of iffy about including it on this list, but honestly most people consider it to be such a classic, and it really is visually I think one of the most stunning games on the PlayStation Portable, and that would be Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII. Now the thing is, it's been forever since I've actually played through this and beat it, so I fired it up recently and I'm happy to see that it definitely still holds up. Now the combat's weird because it's not really real-time, but it's not really turn-based. It's somewhere in between where you sort of move around the battlefield and then sort of put in your actions and wait for them to play out. That can be off-putting for some. I think I had a similar experience with Eternal Sonata on the 360 like forever ago, and at first it was not my favorite thing, but over time I started to get a little bit more into it. And I think it's because the visuals in this game were just so incredibly good for the time that really sort of kept me invested in it and led me to beat it back when I did. I would like to play it again all the way through, probably as we get closer to an actual sequel to the Final Fantasy VII Remake. But if you're somebody who liked the Final Fantasy VII Remake, or really just Final Fantasy VII in general, and you've never had a chance to play this, it's absolutely worth your time. Now, again, you can find it for around 25 bucks, but I've seen these weird periods over the past couple of years where sometimes it shoots up to like 40 or 50. So this is probably the one game on the list that really like toes the line most in terms of like, you know, bang for the buck, in terms of having like a great experience at a decent price that's not going to break the bank. But I highly recommend it. And if you've, you know, never played it before, you should check out some videos online to, you know, kind of get a better idea of what you'll be in for. But ultimately it does tell a story that works in tandem with the Final Fantasy VII story that you might be used to. So if you're looking for more background on those characters, particularly Zack, then you will probably find a lot to love in Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII. Alright, next up, stepping into the puzzle genre, this is, without question, my favorite puzzle game of all time. I've bought it across multiple systems, and you can play it lots of different places, but it made its debut on the PSP, and that is Lumines. I wouldn't call myself a puzzle game connoisseur or anything. You've got your standards that I've liked, like Tetris Effect is really fun. I played the original Tetris, things like Dr. Mario, now Lumines. I have not played every puzzle game in existence or anything like that. What I will say is that out of all of the puzzle games that I've ever played, nothing grabbed my attention and kept me invested in it like Lumines has. And I think that can be credited to a few things. One, the presentation is amazing. It's just so candy-coated and gorgeous every time you fire up a new stage. And the other thing that I really like about it is that, mechanically speaking, they take this excellent soundtrack and make sure that it has true gameplay implications on how each level plays out. The goal in Lumines is basically to clear blocks, make squares of the same color. They get cleared out by a sweeping line that goes from the left side of the screen to the right side of the screen. But what's interesting is that depending on the tempo of the song, that bar that performs the clears might move faster or more slowly. So while you might think that, oh, well, if the bar moves slowly, it's inherently going to be easier, that's not necessarily the case, because while you might build up huge combos with the squares, you might build up so much that the bar isn't sweeping fast enough for you to not crash and basically fill the screen and hit a game over. So the fact that they were able to make an engaging puzzle game that really deviated from the formula of, you know, something falls from the sky and it's your job to put them together in an interlocking way that clears and gives you points, and make it challenging based on the speed, whether it's fast or slow, I thought was really interesting. Throw in the fact that really just every music track on here is exceptional, and you will have a great time with this, and it is a dirt cheap game. You can get Lumines for like 5 to 10 bucks, maybe even cheaper in some cases. But I would say even if you're not really that interested in the PSP and you're just looking to have a great time, you can find Lumines on the Switch, you can find it on Xbox, you can find it on PlayStation. I mean, there are lots of places that you can play Lumines, but again, as a portable gaming unit that lends itself really well to quick pick up and play sessions, I think Lumines really works well here, and again, hardly gonna break the bank. Now let's talk about the arcade genre, or really I guess the arcade collection genre, and one of the first ones that I would recommend would be Capcom Classics Collection Reloaded. And I like this package in particular because it has just a ton of classic Capcom arcade games. Games like Joust, 1942, 1943, Street Fighter, Ghosts and Goblins, I mean pretty much you name it. And even a few games that I never had the chance to play in arcade, which I thought were really interesting, one of which that springs to mind would be Eco Fighters. So if you're somebody who has a special place in your heart for retro even beyond the PSP itself, which is kind of retro at this point, Capcom Classics Collection is worth a look, and it's not one of the more expensive collections that you can get for the system either. And then finally, moving down to the platforming genre, I'm going to go ahead and say one of the most adorable platformers that I've ever played, and I've beaten the original, but not its sequel, but here I'm going to go ahead and recommend the original because, you know, why wouldn't you start with the first one? And that is Loco Roco. Loco Roco is great for a variety of reasons, but I think one of my favorite things about it is its utter simplicity. You really only need to use the L and R buttons to tilt the screen and move your character, and when you do so, you'll find that you're exploring a variety of incredibly colorful and vibrant stages, and their voices are absolutely and sickeningly adorable. They frequently break out into song when you clear a stage, for example, and it's some of the cutest stuff I've ever seen in a video game series. If you're talking about trying to find a game for like a young child or something, it would be hard to go wrong with Loco Roco. But adults shouldn't be turned off of it either, because just, you know, despite the fact that it has just a very cutesy presentation, doesn't mean that the mechanics themselves aren't fun to play around with, because they totally are. And Loco Roco is another game that is not very expensive. I think you can get it for about $9.99. But yeah, if you're looking for something that's slightly less adrenaline, but nonetheless fun and engaging and offers really great level design, Loco Roco will fit the bill. Alright, that's it for this video. I realize a lot of these games are probably well known to anybody who is familiar with the PSP, but again, if you're somebody who's completely unfamiliar with it and just looking for games that will give you a great time, but they're not going to break the bank, I still vouch for every game on this list. I've played them all. They're all super engaging and offer a unique experience depending on whatever genre you're into. So while this video was all about finding games to start your PSP collection if you're not really sure where to begin, it really did cover a lot of, you know, sort of well-tread ground, right? I mean, I didn't really show you anything earth-shattering or completely bonkers and new here. However, on the next video I hope that I can, because one of the things that I want to do in an upcoming video is talk about some of the lesser-known PSP games and why I think you should seek them out, or at least, you know, look into them a little bit more deeply, because these are some lesser-known PSP games that I want to dive into, some of which did not exactly top the charts critically speaking, but I still think that they have some redeeming factors, and I did want to, you know, give them a little play here on the channel as well. So make sure you stay tuned for that, and let me know in the comments below, what are some games that you would recommend to somebody who's new to the PSP platform that has never played it before, even if it's like a hidden and underappreciated gem and it's not one of the more mainstream entries like I've outlined here. Let me know in the comments below. As always, thanks so much for your time. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.